In this video, I'm going to show you how quick and easy it is to make this tender and flaky pie crust from scratch. And we're going to start off by cutting our butter into small cubes. I'm using unsalted butter, and the butter should be cold at the very least. Ideally, it should be frozen. And you want to cut it into tiny cubes as you see on the screen. And once you do that, you're going to move on to the next step in the process. So we're going to move that aside and bring over the little engine that could. I ain't got time to be cleaning up no big old gigantic food processor, so we're leaving Big Daddy where he's at today. But you can use whatever size food processor you have. So I'm going to add some of the flour into the food processor. And that's about 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour I'm using. Just going to add about half of it for now. And then once I add about half of it, I'm going to move on to adding the cubes of butter that we cut up. So we're going to place some of those in there. And then once we have all of those cubes of butter in there, we're going to move on to 1/2 teaspoon iodized salt, not kosher salt, iodized salt, which is table salt. Then we're going to add 2 teaspoons of white granulated sugar, and then we're going to add in the rest of that flour. And then once we get the rest of that flour in there, we're going to move on to blending all of the ingredients together in the food processor. So we're going to give it a good shake. Then we're going to put the top for the food processor on there, and I'm blending it for about 15 seconds. I sped it up in the video. And once it's all blended together, we're going to move on to the next step in the process. So that's how it should look once you blend it in the food processor. And I'm going to place it into a large mixing bowl now. So we're just going to dump that into the large bowl. And if there's some stuck to the bottom, you should scoop it out with a spoon, which is what I'm doing right now. And once you get all of that in there, now, depending on how much moisture was trapped in your food processor, your dough may end up a bit clumpy. So in my case, it ended up a bit clumpy. So I'm breaking it up a bit with the cooking spoon that you see on the screen. And now I'm going to add 1/4 cup of cold water to the dough. And it has to be cold water, as that cold water will help to slow down the gluten development in the dough. So we're just going to give it all a good stir until that water is well combined into the dough. It should have the shaggy, damp texture that you see on the screen. And we're going to scrape off some of that dough that's stuck to the cooking spoon before we move on to the next step. And then I'm going to lay down my mat that we'll be using to pat down the dough. And I'm sprinkling some flour onto the mat. This will keep the dough from sticking onto the mat as I try to pat it down and press it together. And it's not necessary to knead the dough, because if you knead the dough, that will lead to gluten development, which will give you a very tough crust. So again, you're just pressing it all together, and it'll solidify once you place it in the refrigerator. In any event the dough is still sticky while you're doing this, you can always just sprinkle a bit more flour onto the dough in order to firm it up. So this step should take less than a minute. And now with the dough pressed together, I'm just going to seal it in some plastic wrap, which I have on the screen. So I'm just going to fold it until it's well sealed. And then we're going to place it in the refrigerator. I would say you should allow it to chill for at least 30 minutes, but up to 2 hours. And now what we're going to do is preheat the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. So at this point in the video, about 30 minutes have passed. I just sprinkled a bit more flour onto the surface to keep the dough from sticking. And I just removed the dough from the refrigerator. So what I'm going to do before I roll it out is form it into a ball-like shape. And this will help to ensure that when we roll it out, it rolls out into a round symmetrical circle that fits seamlessly over the pie plate, which you're going to see in a little bit. And while you're rolling it out, in the event the rolling pin starts to stick on the dough, you can just sprinkle some more flour on top of the dough. That will help to prevent any sticking. In this video, I'm using a 9-inch pie pan, so I'm going to roll out this dough until it is 11 to 12 inches in diameter. This will allow for about 1 inch or 2 of the dough to hang over the pie pan to account for any shrinkage that will occur as it is part baked in the oven. And what you just saw with the rolling pin is a trick that a lot of bakers use. This is to help prevent the pie dough from tearing apart as you place it on the pie pan. So what I like to do for easier handling is place the pie pan on top of a baking sheet. Handle on the edges of the baking sheet versus the pie pan itself. What you're also going to do is cut off any excess overhanging dough. I'm using kitchen shears to do so. Ultimately, there should only be about 1 inch, maybe 2 inches of overhanging dough before you place it in the oven. And the reason why we're doing this is because the butter that we added, no water, and what will happen once the pie crust is in the oven, that butter, it will turn into steam, but in the process it will also cause the pie to shrivel up as that water evaporates. So that's why ultimately you want at least some dough to be overhanging the pie pan to account for that shrinkage. At the same time, that exact same process is what will give the pie crust its flaky layers, as that steam will create tiny little pockets all throughout the crevices of the pie crust. Placed a sheet of parchment paper inside the crust, and I placed coffee beans on top of the parchment paper. This is to help weigh the crust down. You can use pie weights if you have them. I don't. Coffee beans is a good alternative, so is rice or regular beans. And I'm going to bake it in the oven at 350 degrees for about 20 minutes. So 20 minutes have passed at this point. So I just removed the crust from the oven, and I'm going to remove that parchment paper with the coffee beans as well. And you would just go around the pie pan once more to cut off any overhanging crust. And at this point, your crust is done. You can add your filling and continue baking. For more recipes, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.